We have a picture for you to look at this morning, and I want to ask you a question as you look at this picture. You see Jesus standing with his hands bound before Pilate, sitting on his throne. And the question is, who's in charge here? The appearance, when you look at it, what most people would see, looking just from a human perspective, is that Pilate is the one sitting on the throne. That he has the full power of Rome behind him, all the authority of the Roman Empire behind him. And standing before him is a man who has been beaten and bound and who is destined for death. But things are not always as they appear, are they? Often it appears that evil is winning the day. Right now, when you watch the news, you see regular reports of terrorism and ISIS and pure evil in its rawest forms. And it appears, if you didn't know any better, that evil was winning the day. 2,600 years ago, it appeared that Nebuchadnezzar was winning the day, that he was in control. He certainly thought that he was, until he had a dream. We studied this a few weeks ago as we were working our way through the book of Daniel. And in Daniel chapter 2, Nebuchadnezzar had a very disturbing dream that Daniel interpreted it for him. And it was a dream that ultimately showed that Nebuchadnezzar's rule was limited. In the dream, he saw this gigantic statue, and it had a head of gold, which Daniel will tell him later stood for Babylon, the great kingdom that Nebuchadnezzar ruled. And that kingdom would rule the earth for 66 years. That statue had a chest made out of silver, and Daniel explained to him that silver chest stood for the nation of Persia, which was going to come in and conquer Babylon, much to the chagrin of Nebuchadnezzar, but Persia would rule the world for 208 years. He explained that the bronze belly of the statue was Greece, and Greece would conquer Persia and rule the world for 185 years. And then the iron legs and feet stood for the Roman Empire, the great Roman Empire that would rule the world for 622 years. Can you imagine that? And in that prophecy, in Daniel chapter 2, this prophecy predicted the next 1,000 years of world history. And it predicted it with perfect accuracy as to all these nations that were going to come in. And then in that same dream, a rock that was cut loose, not with human hands, but it was cut loose, smashed the entire statue into bits, and it blew away like dust in the wind. And that statue became a huge mountain and set up a kingdom that would last forever and ever. And of course, that was a prediction of the coming of Jesus Christ, who would rule as the King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Now, 60 years later, after that vision that Nebuchadnezzar had, 60 years later, God gave Daniel another vision of the same four kingdoms, but the vision is totally different. It's not a statue now. Now it's four beasts. And we're going to see these four beasts in Daniel chapter 7. Just to give you a little idea of what's coming up in this, the four beasts are all going to come out of the sea. And what that tells Daniel is that these four beasts are from the earth. They're the same. Each beast represents one of these kingdoms. They're going to represent Babylon and Persia and Greece and Rome. This time there's going to be more description of these kingdoms, and you're going to see God adding a little more detail to the vision that he gives to Daniel. The question that you might have at this point is, so what? It's ancient prophecy. Why should I care about this ancient prophecy? Well, I'll tell you why. In fact, I'm going to give you 3 reasons why, because that's what pastors do. They always give you 3 points, 3 reasons. We're required to do that by law. So the first reason that you should care about this prophecy is it proves God's sovereign control over the entire world, over all rulers and all kingdoms and all nations. It means that God knows exactly which rulers will dominate the earth and for how long they will dominate the earth. So if you translate that in today's terms, it means that he knows exactly how long Kim Jong-un is going to rule North Korea and how long Assad is going to be in Syria and when they're going to be taken out. God already knows that because he is in control of all of history. The second reason that you should be interested in listening and learning about ancient prophecy is that these prophecies assure us that all of these world leaders, no matter how powerful they are, one day all of them are going to be replaced by the true king who is going to reign forever and ever. So don't be worried and upset. You know, the way Jesus put it to his disciples is, let not your hearts be troubled. Trust in God. Trust also in me. The third reason why you should care about this ancient prophecy is that when you see how precisely his predictions are fulfilled, it assures us that any future predictions that have not yet been fulfilled, they will be fulfilled exactly as he says. Because all of these kingdoms that he predicted them hundreds of years before they took place with uncanny accuracy. It means that some of these predictions, and in chapter 7, most of these predictions have already been fulfilled perfectly, but there's at least one that we're going to run into today that's a future prediction. And that prediction we know is going to happen exactly the way God says, because every prediction he gives is fulfilled with perfect accuracy. That's why we should pay attention to Daniel 7, and I hope you do. And let me give you just one piece of advice. We're going to put Daniel 7 up here in front, but I'm going to quote a number of verses from Revelation which coincide with Daniel 7 in the most amazing way. So what I would like you to do is, if you have a Bible with you, and there's one in front of you if you need one, open it up to the book of Revelation and just keep it ready. I think we're going to start with about Revelation 13 or 14, but just keep it ready so that when I'm going to put Daniel 7 in front of you, when we quote from Revelation, you can look it up yourself, make sure that I'm being accurate with you. Okay. We're going to start now with Daniel chapter 7, and I just want to give you, he gives us the setting in the very first line, and I need to explain it, and then we're going to go on. The very first verse of Daniel 7, he says, "In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon." Now, if you've been with us for the last few weeks, we've gone through chapters 1 through 6 of Daniel. We've had a lot of fun with that. The first 6 chapters are great because they have Daniel in the lion's den, they have the fiery furnace, they have the writing on the wall, all these great miraculous moments. But we also ran into Belshazzar. And we saw that Belshazzar, two weeks ago, we read Daniel chapter 5. And Belshazzar was the one that saw the writing on the wall when he gave the banquet for 1,000 people. And he asked Daniel to interpret the writing on the wall, and Daniel basically explained that the writing on the wall meant that he was going to die. And the fact was, he was going to die that very night as Persia finally came in and conquered Babylon. That same night. That was back in Daniel 5. So when he starts off Daniel 7 by saying, "In the first year of Belshazzar," he's giving us a flashback. He's actually going back 14 years earlier to when Belshazzar had just started his kingdom. We know how Belshazzar's kingdom ended with his death when Persia came in. But 14 years earlier, Daniel had a vision. So he kind of went in chronological order for the first 6 chapters, but now he's not going to go any longer in chronological order. Now he's going to give us the order of these visions that took place. Okay. In the first year of Belshazzar, king of Babylon, Daniel had a dream, and visions passed through his mind as he was lying in bed. He wrote down the substance of his dream. Daniel said, "In my vision at night I looked, and there before me were 4 winds of heaven churning up the great sea. 4 great beasts, each different from the others, came up out of the sea." Now notice that all 4 of these great beasts come out of the sea. And again, this is God's way of telling him that these are earthly kingdoms that he's describing to you. You're going to see the contrast later on with one coming from heaven. These come out of the sea. These are coming from earth, which means that even though they are fierce, their power is limited, as we'll see. Verse 4, "The first was like a lion, and it had the wings of an eagle. I watched until its wings were torn off, and it was lifted from the ground so that it stood on 2 feet like a human being, and the mind of a human was given to it." What kind of crazy vision is this? Well, what ancient man would have known when they read that was the lion was the national symbol of Babylon. In fact, guarding the the palace in the capital of Babylon were these two winged lions, these two statues that were winged lions. So in his vision, when he had this lion coming up out of the sea with the wings of eagles, everybody would have known, oh, that's Babylon. Now that doesn't, then when Daniel saw the first part of the vision, that didn't take a lot of supernatural knowledge because Babylon was already in charge. They were already in control. But all of these other kingdoms had never even been heard of yet. And so that's only the first one. Verse 5. And there before me was a second beast, which looked like a bear. It was raised up on one of its sides, and it had 3 ribs in its mouth between its teeth. It was told, get up and eat your fill of flesh. Ooh, this is violent stuff, isn't it? The bear represents Persia. And a bear is big, but it's slow. And this is a perfect description of Persia that would eventually conquer Babylon. The Persian army, it's really, the full name of it is the Medes and the Persians, so they call it the Medo-Persian kingdom, but we'll just call it Persia for our sake here. Their army was so huge that at one point, when they were attacking one of the kingdoms that they destroyed, they put together 2.5 million men in an army. Can you imagine an army of 2.5 million men coming at these kingdoms back in this day? So that's why he described it as a bear, because it was big, it was huge, and it was slow, but it was fierce. And the ribs in its mouth were the nations that it had just chewed up, and as he says here, ate their fill of flesh. Verse 6, after that I looked, and there before me was another beast. This is number 3, one that looked like a leopard. And on its back it had 4 wings like those of a bird, and its beast had 4 heads, and it was given authority to rule. The leopard is Greece. Now the leopard is fast. It's one of the fastest animals on earth. And when you add the wings of an eagle to it, it makes it even faster. And this perfectly describes the army of Alexander the Great. Alexander the Great, who conquered the entire world by the time he was 28 years old, he did that because his army was so fast. It conquered an 11,000-mile stretch from Greece to India in a very brief period of time. He only had 35,000 men in his army, as opposed to the Persian army of 2.5 million. He had 35,000, but they were lightning fast, and they conquered these nations one after the other. They fell like dominoes before him. In fact, he conquered the whole known world by the age of 28, and he was so depressed that there were no other nations to conquer that he drank himself to death by the time he was 33 years old. That's Alexander the Great. Perfectly described here. By the way, it mentions at the end the beast had 4 heads. You talk about detailed description of this kingdom. When Alexander the Great drank himself to death at the age of 33, there were 4 generals who divided his kingdom up and ruled his kingdom after that. And Daniel foretold that about 170 years before it took place. Great detail in this prophecy. Verse 7. After that, in my vision at night I looked, and there before me was a 4th beast, terrifying and frightening and very powerful. It had large iron teeth. It crushed and devoured its victims and trampled underfoot whatever was left. It was different from all the former beasts, and it had 10 horns. Everybody would have known now, looking back at it, what that was, because the beast with the iron teeth was Rome. They were the Iron Legion. They were the most vicious of all the nations. They destroyed everything. They were vicious and they were bloodthirsty. You saw it even in their entertainment, in their Colosseum, when they would get together with this bloodthirst to watch their enemies be torn to bit by lions or conquered by their own soldiers. But when they were conquering Jerusalem at one point, just to show you what a vicious, bloodthirsty people they were, they cut off the food supply of Jerusalem, so the people were starving inside. And as people would try to escape to get food, they would be captured by the Romans. And they would capture as many as 500 people a day. And those people would be tortured and crucified right outside the walls of Jerusalem. So all the people inside the walls could hear the screaming and agony as their people were tortured and died outside their walls. This was a vicious, vicious kingdom. And so they're described as this beast with iron teeth. And it says it had 10 horns. We're going to get to that in just a moment. Verse 8. While I was thinking about the horns, There before me was another horn, a little one, that came up among them. And 3 of the first horns were uprooted before it. This horn had eyes, like the eyes of a human being, a mouth that spoke boastfully. Now we're going to get into a prophecy that has not yet been fulfilled. This is a prophecy of the future. In fact, theologians call this kind of a prophecy already, not yet. Some of the prophecy has already been fulfilled. This prophecy has not yet been fulfilled. But because the other prophecy was perfectly fulfilled, we know that this one will also perfectly be fulfilled, but this one is still in our future. So what does it mean? It talked about 10 horns. The 10 horns describe 10 nations that will unite to control the world. A lot of people today, they look at the European Union, they look at the common market, and they say this could be the 10 nations that unite. We don't know for sure that's what it is, but it looks like it could be. The one horn that defeated the others and spoke boastfully describes what is later to be called the Antichrist. There's going to be more about him later on in verse 24. But now Daniel's vision is going to shift to the throne of God in heaven. And look what he says in verse 9. As I looked, thrones were set in place, and the Ancient of Days took his seat. This is a vision of God the Father. The Ancient of Days took his seat on this throne in heaven. His clothing was as white as snow. The hair of his head was white like wool. Now let me just say something about that. When we think of white hair, we think of old age. My granddaughter loves to remind me of that all the time. She'll say, "Why is your hair gray?" And I'll say, "Because I'm really old." And she'll say, "You're really old. Look at that." We think of white hair and old age. Now, the mistake people make with God is some people see God as like an old grandfather sitting up in heaven. A feeble old grandfather, a loving old grandfather who goes, "Oh, look at the kids. Look at how much fun they're having." He is not a feeble old man. What the Bible says, when the Bible speaks of white hair, it represents that God is eternal. It represents divine wisdom. It does not represent that he is weak and feeble. Look at the next line. It says, his throne was flaming with fire. And fire is judgment in this case. And its wheels were ablaze. You see his throne has wheels? And no, it's not a wheelchair. It is a chariot that is going to come in fire and destroy. So don't picture the old man in a wheelchair up there. This is a conquering king in a chariot that is going to come down and judge the world. In verse 10, a river of fire was flowing, coming out from before him. You know, in some of the descriptions of heaven, we have the river of life flowing from the throne of God. But here, when there is judgment still to be done, it's a river of fire that's flowing out before him. Thousands upon thousands attended him. 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him, and the court was seated, and the books were opened. That's this picture of heaven. Now, just to show you how similar it is to the vision that God gave to John, when he wrote the book of Revelation, I want you to look at Revelation chapter 20. And I don't have this one in front of you. But in Revelation chapter 20, you're going to see John's vision of the Lord seated on a great white throne. And the books are opened, and death and Hades are thrown into the fire. And it's all of the same things that he said about here, about the fire, and the books were opened, and judgment takes place. Some of that continues as you watch, as we read the next verse here, verse 11. Back to Daniel 7 with me. Then I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. Now we're back to the Antichrist. Remember the horn that spoke boastful words? I continued to watch because of the boastful words the horn was speaking. I kept looking until the beast was slain and its body destroyed and thrown into the blazing fire. That's exactly what Revelation 20 said. The other beast had been stripped of their authority, but were allowed to live for a period of time. If you have Revelation open, look at chapter 19, verse 20. Listen to this, Revelation 19:20. Now I'm reading it in the New International Version, and yours may be different, but this is what it says. But the beast was captured, and with it the false prophet who had performed the signs on its behalf. And with these signs he had deluded those who had received the mark of the beast and worshipped its image. the two of them were thrown alive into the fiery lake of burning sulfur. That's what Daniel saw, that the beast was slain, its body was destroyed, and thrown into the blazing fire. So Daniel saw the same vision that John had, that this beast, this Antichrist, was thrown into the lake. So we know what's going to happen at the end with the Antichrist. Look at verse 13. Watch this. This was when it gets so amazing. In my vision at night I looked, and there before me was one like a son of man. But notice, he's not coming out of the sea. Look at this. One like the Son of Man, coming with clouds of heaven. He approached the Ancient of Days and was led into his presence. He was given authority, glory, and sovereign power. All nations and people of every language worshipped him. His dominion was an everlasting dominion that will not pass away, and his kingdom is one that will never be destroyed. Wow. The other nations came out of the sea. They were from earth. Their power was limited, and they were eventually destroyed. The Son of Man comes from heaven. His power is eternal, and he will rule forever, and everything on earth bows and worships him. This was written 600 years before Jesus was born. He's describing the coming of the Messiah on the one hand. He's also describing the second coming of Jesus in the end times. Already? Not yet. In contrast to the earthly powers, he's riding the clouds of heaven. And if you say, how do we know that this one, the Son of Man, is Jesus? Well, we know that because Jesus called himself the Son of Man. He called himself the Son of Man 72 times in the Gospels. 72 times. That was his term for himself, was the Son of Man, to make sure that we understood the Son of Man that Daniel saw. Jesus knew beyond a doubt that he was that Son of Man who came from the clouds of heaven. Now let's go back to Revelation for a minute and see how John saw the exact same vision. In chapter 14, verse 14 in Revelation. 14:14. I looked, and there before me was a white cloud, and seated on the cloud was one like a son of man, with a crown of gold on his head and a sharp sickle in his hand. Same exact vision, Revelation 14:14. If you move ahead to Revelation 17, we're going to go back to the 10 horns now. Revelation 17, verses 12 to 14. The 10 horns you saw are 10 kings who have not yet received the kingdom, but who for 1 hour will receive authority as kings along with the beast. They have one purpose and will give their power and authority to the beast. That's the Antichrist. They will wage war against the Lamb. You see that? They're going up against Jesus. But the Lamb will triumph over them because he is Lord of lords and King of kings. And with him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. It's talking about you. With him will be his called, chosen, and faithful followers. So what it's telling us is, it's the spoiler alert for the Bible. It tells us at the end of this great battle, God wins, and you're going to be with him when it happens. The second half of Daniel chapter 7, he gives us the interpretation of the dream. Look at verse 15. I, Daniel, was troubled in spirit, and the visions that passed through my mind disturbed me. I approached one of those standing there, and I asked him the meaning of all of this. You might think like I did, who is he talking about? I approached one of those standing there and asked him. Apparently there's an angel standing there watching this whole vision unfold. And Daniel turns to the angel and says, what does it all mean? So he told me and gave me the interpretation of these things. Verse 17, the 4 great beasts are 4 kings that will rise from the earth. But the holy people of the Most High will receive the kingdom and will possess it forever. Yes, forever and ever. Then I wanted to know the meaning of the 4th beast, which was different from all the others, and the most terrifying, and its iron teeth and bronze claws. By the way, this is a little detail, but when I read that, I went, bronze claws? I went back to the original vision, and there were no bronze claws. So I think what happened was Daniel was describing this dream of this beast that came out, and he was so focused on the iron teeth of this beast, He didn't even mention the bronze claws. But the angel, when he's describing it, he says that he's describing this beast. He not only had iron teeth, but he had bronze claws. The beast that crushed and devoured its victim and trampled underfoot whatever was left. I also wanted to know about the 10 horns on its head and about the other horn that came up, before which 3 of them fell. The horn that looked more imposing than the others, which had eyes and a mouth and which spoke boastfully. We're back to the Antichrist again. As I watched, the horn was waging war. Watch this now. The horn was waging war against the holy people and defeating them until the Ancient of Days came and pronounced judgment in favor of the holy people of the Most High. And the time came when they possessed the kingdom. So he mentions the 10 horns, 10 kingdoms that will get together. Out of those 10 kingdoms, one person will be appointed to the highest place, the Antichrist, the one horn who speaks boastfully. He mentions it 3 times so far. And he's more imposing than all of the rest. But if you watch now, we're going to see he's going to fall like all the other earthly kingdoms fell. He, meaning the angel, gave me this explanation. The 4th beast is a 4th kingdom that will appear on the earth. That's Rome. It will be different from all the other kingdoms and will devour the whole earth, trampling it down and crushing it. The 10 horns are 10 kings who will come from this kingdom. And after them, another king will arise, different from the earlier ones. He will subdue the 3 kings. This is the Antichrist now. He will speak against the Most High and oppress the holy people and try to change the set times and the laws. Listen to this very carefully as you think about end times prophecy. The holy people will be delivered into his hands for time, times, and half a time. Okay, we need to take a half a time here and explain this real quickly here. A time means 1 year. Times, plural, means 2 years. Half a time is half a year. Add those up, you get a period of 3.5 years. In other words, the holy people will be delivered into the hands of the Antichrist for 3.5 years. It is what we call the tribulation. The Antichrist is going to rule for 7 years. In the last half of his rule, he is going to persecute God's people. Now, we don't talk a lot about pre-trib, post-trib, and all that kind of stuff, but if you're a person who believes in a pre-trib rapture, which means that all the Christians are going to be taken up out of the earth, so we will not suffer during the tribulation, this verse does not say that. This verse says that Christians will be here. The holy people will suffer for 3.5 years under the Antichrist. So if you're a big fan of the Left Behind series, this is not the same doctrine, the same teaching of the Left Behind, the pre-trib rapture. This would be describing what is called a post-trib rapture, where God's people are there during the tribulation before they are taken up to be with Jesus Christ. Let me just show you how that is similar to Revelation 13. So open up Revelation again, the first 7 verses. There are so many similar things in this verse, you're going to think that he just stole it from Daniel. He plagiarized it. But this was the vision that God gave to John. In Revelation 13, verse 1, and I saw a beast coming out of the sea. Oh, we just read that. He had 10 horns and 7 heads, and 10 crowns on his horns, and on each head a blasphemous name. The beast I saw resembled a leopard that had feet like those of a bear and a mouth like those of a lion. Those sound familiar too, don't they? The dragon gave the beast his power and his throne and great authority. One of the heads of the beast seemed to have a fatal wound, but the fatal wound had been healed. The whole world was astonished and followed the beast, speaking of the Antichrist. Men worshiped the dragon because he had given authority to the beast. And they also worshiped the beast and asked, who is like the beast? Who can make war against him? They think the Antichrist is unbeatable, all-powerful. The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words. Remember the boastful words of Daniel 7? The beast was given a mouth to utter proud words and blasphemies and to exercise his power for 42 months. Do the math. How many years is that? 3.5 years. The beast is given a mouth to utter proud words and exercise his authority for 3.5 years. Verse 6, he opened his mouth to blaspheme God, to slander his name and his dwelling place and those who live in heaven. He was given power to make war. Here it is again. He was given power to make war against the saints and to conquer them. How can that be if they've already been taken off the earth? They're there. They're on the earth. The saints are there. And he's given authority to conquer them. He was given authority over every tribe, people, nation, and language. If we go back to Daniel, we're going to see the conclusion of this vision in verse 26. But the court will sit. This is the court where the Ancient of Days is on the throne. And his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. The Antichrist, his power will be taken away and completely destroyed forever. Then the sovereignty, power, and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. That is you. The power and greatness of all the kingdoms under heaven will be handed over to the holy people of the Most High. It means that you are going to rule with Jesus Christ. His kingdom will be an everlasting kingdom, and all rulers will worship and obey him. Verse 28. This is the end of the matter. That's it. That's his prophecy. But look at his conclusion. I, Daniel, was deeply troubled in my thoughts, and my face turned pale, but I kept the matter to myself. Why was Daniel deeply troubled? I mean, it turned out okay, didn't it? God won in the end. The beast was destroyed. Why was he deeply troubled? Well, I think he was deeply troubled because what his prophecy revealed was that man's rebellion against God wouldn't stop with the Israelites who had gotten away from God's word. Man's rebellion wouldn't stop after the Persians and the Greeks and the Romans ruled. Man's rebellion against God would actually increase and ramp up and come to its peak at the very end of the age. At the end of the world, man would be at its peak rebellion against God, and many would suffer. God's holy people would suffer at the hands of this Antichrist. And it broke Daniel's heart to see all the suffering that was going to happen before finally God would pronounce judgment and destroy those who were evil and set up his kingdom that would last forever. It broke his heart. So we rejoice that God wins, and we win, but we grieve that so many will suffer and perish. So what's the big idea? That's a lot of details, a lot of information. What's the big idea of this passage? Why is it important? The book of Daniel itself was written to comfort the Israelites in Daniel's day. All the appearance, I said at the very beginning, appearances can be deceiving. It appeared as if God had been defeated when the Babylonians came and carried off many of these Israelites as captives. And so the book of Daniel was written to let them know God was not defeated. This victory that Babylon had is temporary. And it fits into God's overall plan that's going to last forever and come out perfectly in the end. So it was written to comfort the Israelites. The visions of the future kingdoms about Persia and Greece and Rome, those were written for future Israelites who were going to suffer under them. So even in the time of Jesus, when Rome was ruling Israel, they could look back at the book of Daniel and say, this is what Daniel predicted. This is what God showed Daniel 600 years ago, that Rome was going to be ruling. But from the book of Daniel, we can see that Rome is not going to rule forever. So this is temporary. Appearances can be deceiving. Rome is not in control. God is in control. But this last part is here to assure us that even the most powerful ruler who ever ruled, the Antichrist, who is going to make Assad and Kim Jong-un and all these others look puny in comparison, and is going to terrify you when you see it, it is to assure us that God is still in control, that his kingdom, as powerful as it is, will not last forever. That in God's perfect time, he will be destroyed and thrown into that eternal fire, and Jesus Christ will reign forever and ever, along with all of his holy and chosen people. Now, the fact that all of these things that he predicted that have already been fulfilled in the past, the fact that these were unfolded exactly the way Daniel said they were, it tells us that the future will unfold exactly as he said. All these predictions about the Antichrist, you can take it to the bank. Those things are going to happen exactly as he said. But remember, what he's telling us is, no matter how bad it gets, what you can count on and be with absolute certainty is that God wins. And when God wins, you win. We're on the winning team. Let's pray together.